What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION and I got quite a bit to show you today from a Warhammer 40K writer who's gone off the deep end with woke identity politics that's pushing all sorts of ideology into the canon narrative, and another Warhammer writer who hates the fan base, especially those who are straight white men. As well as updates on the Helldivers 2 Sony nonsense where the community manager and CEO of Arrowhead are attempting to douse the flames as the controversy gets even worse. And finally, a new game that may be pushing back against DEI practices, so let's begin. Firstly, I want to bring up the story involving a content creator named Sargon of Akkad. You likely know who this is, but if you don't, Sargon has been on YouTube and within the culture war space for far longer than I have. I remember watching his content when I was much younger and seeing all the crazy things that have been slung at his image in response by detractors. But now, he's actually become canon in Warhammer 40K for all the wrong reasons. Yeah, you heard that right. From that Park Place, we have this article titled Games Workshop Villainizes Political Pundit Carl Benjamin aka Sargon of Akkad in Warhammer 40K. This was unearthed recently by fandompulse.com, which exposed how there is a book within the Warhammer 40K universe that was released called Necromunda Road to Redemption, which was written by author Mike Brooks. Also, don't harass this person, let's just look at what they're doing. This writer, Mike Brooks, has been tied to Warhammer and Games Workshop for a long time at this point, and he's apparently completely drunk on woke Kool-Aid. Like, if you thought other writers were pushing identity politics, nah man, this writer is like one of the final bosses of that kind of stuff. Mike Brooks is about as woke as you can get in the year that is 2024, and that's saying something. But users were quick to point out that in that Necromunda novel, one of the antagonists is a slave master named Sargon of Akkad, which is obviously a twisting of words and meant to be a jab at Sargon of Akkad, because Mike Brooks hates anyone who doesn't agree with wokeness. Here's some of what's said within Necromunda Road to Redemption, and the scene described is between a character named Alan Chol, who's rising up against the slave master Sargon of Akkad. I mean, come on, just listen to this and I quote. Sargon of Akkad bellowed with rage, his voxcaster amplifying it until his war cry was nearly a weapon in its own right, and lumbered into a charge, both chain axes revving up until the whirl of their blades became a banshee scream. Alan Chol raised their silenced stub gun and trained it on the behemoth bearing down on them. An action which looked to Zeke to be the equivalent of menacing some croc with a toothpick. Shadows threw themselves on Akkad, slowing him, overwhelming him. The slave master lashed out with his chain axes and one of his assailants was thrown clear. Nearly bisected, but there were too many for him to fight. His arms were immobilized and he was borne down to the ground, bellowing with impotent rage. Then a short, squat shape clambered onto his back and wrapped a chain, a slave's manacles, around Akad's neck and began to pull. Akad's breathing, hideously amplified by his voxcaster, became more and more ragged, more and more desperate. Then, as his executioner gave one final wrench on the chain, Sargon of Akkad's death rattle rang out. End quote. So, Sargon of Akkad was killed by being overwhelmed by his own slaves who rushed him like locusts and choked him to death with the very chains he put them in. Typical stick it to the slave master man story, we've seen this 100 times before. I mean, Jabba the Hutt died the same way by a slave as well, it's just that again, but it's funny how people like Sargon of Akkad lives rent-free within the heads of these woke weirdos like this. They always claim that the existence of counterculture doesn't affect them, yet it's evidently true that our existence lives in these people's heads all the time. They hate us with a passion and would love to see all of us meet the grave sooner than later. And I think it's very weird that this writer went out of their way to take someone they disagree with and essentially turn them into a Warhammer character in order to prove some sort of gotcha against them. But Sargon being Sargon, he took the jab with grace where he said via Twitter, "I am officially canon in the Warhammer universe." And Sargon even asked fans to send him any more excerpts from the book so he could learn more about his self-insert bad guy character that was written by a woke lunatic. One user named Chainsword40K, cool name, sent an excerpt which read, "That voice again, stentorian and rolling, packed with bombast and venom. A huge figure stepped into Zeke's view, silhouetted against the shifting blue light of the plasma regulators. He was close enough not to make out details: a pair of chain axes, one held casually in each hand, a breath grill over the man's mouth must contain the receiver for the Voxcaster speakers, which sat atop his armored pauldrons and sent his voice booming out into the underhive. His hair was long and dark and fell wetly over his chest and shoulders. His features were largely in shadow, but what Zeke could see of them were suffused with rage. Sargon of Akkad, Slave Master. Zeke stumbled to a halt and raised his auto pistol, firing a spray of shells. His aim was off and the rounds knocked sparks from a god's chest plate instead of blowing apart his skull. The Slave Master staggered back but kept his feet. To which Sargon himself replied, "What a cool description." And he's right, actually. This Mike Brooks guy, or maybe person, I have no idea. They're a woke weirdo. They could identify as all kinds of things, but I'll assume it's a he based on the name, has inadvertently turned Sargon into some badass character within Warhammer lore. It's funny how this was supposed to be an own, as if it was meant to be taken as a suck it chuds moment. But instead, people think this is really cool. You describe Sargon of Akkad's Warhammer self-insert as a huge behemoth of a man with gigantic weapons, who's clad in massive armor with scary features and long, wet, dark hair, whose deep, dark voice bellows across the underhive, terroring the meek victims beneath him. Like, if you wanted to own Sargon, you would have made his self-insert some pathetic, weak loser of a guy. But instead, they unironically turned him into this monster of a threat with huge weapons and stuff. Like, this isn't a self-own, this is actually flattering to Sargon. As always, woke morons fail and end up owning themselves more than anything else, but this is great. I hope one day I'm able to get myself thrown into a book or comic as a villain. That would mean I really made it. I would find it flattering more than anything else, but to Mike Brook, this probably seems like a huge win in their books, but it isn't. And that same user, Chainsword 40K, graciously gave the Warhammer community plenty of examples of what Mike Brooks is all about and what their ideology is. And as I read these things, you'll come to realize that the rot of identity politics, it runs deep within Warhammer for years at this point, sadly. As Chainsword 40K states, just a friendly reminder that Mike Brooks' new novel, Lilith Hesperax, Queen of Knives, will be released later this year. I won't tell you what to do, but I am not buying it. Mike Brooks is obsessed with gender identity and one of the most woke authors. Here are some examples. And let's read some of this, but wow, okay, to start, Wanted Dead, LGBT characters, gangers that believe in the god Empress instead of Emperor. The Big Daka, transgender Drukhari, brutal Kanin non-binary characters and gender-neutral pronouns. Renegades Hero Master, paraphrasing what Umberto Eco writes in Fascism, Road to Redemption writing villain known as Sargon of Akkad, which is an obvious job at Sargon of Akkad, Carl Benjamin. Lots of try-hard allegories of real-life politics, Lion, Sons of the Forest, new pronouns and gender identity, implying that Space Marines could have some kind of romantic feelings for each other. Rites of passage, yep, you guessed it, new pronouns, pushing his own ideology into the characters' mouths. Especially that one book Mike Brooks wrote, Wanted Dead, which is also within the Necromunda series within Warhammer via the Black Library. The fact that characters within it worship the god Empress instead of the Emperor, come on, dude. I remember saying a few videos back it was only a matter of time before someone in Warhammer started to tease the idea of a female god emperor sitting on the throne, and it turns out I was both right and wrong in a way, since it technically had already been suggested. And the problem here is that people like Mike Brooks, who has obviously made a ton of stuff within Warhammer already, they have their stain all over the property to begin with. And they will likely remain and continue to fail upwards as time goes on until eventually they become more senior and gain more power. If someone like Mike Brooks were to become the head of Warhammer story to any capacity, you can bet your sweet butt cheeks your god emperor would be reincarnated as a woman immediately. And suddenly all your custodians would be female and also very gay. Mike Brooks even said this via Twitter. P.S. Freebooters support pride, trans rights, and Black Lives Matter. In case you don't know, the Freebooters are a faction of orcs that are basically like mercenary pirates that don't really fall in line with any particular group. They just offer their services as long as the price is right. But regardless, Mike Brooks here using this faction to promote things like BLM and Pride kind of personifies everything that is kind of wrong with today's modern writing and franchises. Warhammer 40K is obviously set thousands of years in the future and has largely reverted back to a more religious-like state of existence within mankind's reign. And yet here you have this writer using a group of orcs, which are obviously not human or has any connection to them, and yet they promote ideologies that are made by real-life humans in the year 2024 of all things. This is just political nonsense that's disguised as virtue signaling, where someone is using a property to parrot their preferred set of ideological beliefs. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Brooks one day makes a character like an orc unironically say Black Lives Matter in the lore. And this is one of the biggest problems with any franchise these days, as activists get hired and they just can't help themselves but inject real-world politics into worlds that are completely divorced from our own reality. You can't just enjoy your grim, dark science fiction fantasy universe anymore. You have to open your mouth and drink the polluted Kool-Aid, or else you're excommunicated and worse, and I think that's wrong. The equivalent of an orc saying Black Lives Matter would be like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings looking directly into the camera lens and saying Sauron votes for Trump or something. Like, that just goes beyond immersion breaking. It's just downright stupid. There's also another writer that's also getting exposed. They're also very woke, and their name is Ashley Cooper. Don't harass this person either. They've been found to be yet another person who openly hates white men in every capacity. And they're also, unfortunately, the senior writer on the upcoming game Space Marine 2. Ashley Cooper has also said stuff in the past like, "Let's not cast cis white men and stuff for a year and see what happens just for fun." Ah yes, this tired reply again. They just hate white people, man. It's really all it is, even though they are clearly white themselves. It's the same pathetic white savior complex where they feel they're somehow inherently bad people because their skin color is white. And they feel like they need to apologize for something that is out of their control. This Space Marine 2 writer continues by saying, "Sorry cishet white dudes, comics don't belong to you, comics never belong to you." Don't tell this Ashley Cooper person that comics wouldn't even exist alongside all the characters they attempt to appropriate without white dudes. Their heads may explode. Look, you can hate yourself all you want. The truth is that a lot of these franchises that these woke weirdos cling themselves to in order to gain relevancy would not exist without the very white men they claim to hate so much. For example, let's look at this Ashley Cooper's work history here. They worked for RuPaul's Drag Race and some mobile game that's based on that brand. Obviously, I'm not the targeted audience for that, so no idea. To nobody's surprise, they also worked on Gotham Knights, and I believe it. I mean, that game goes out of its way to tell you how Nightwing is apparently bisexual, and Robin likes to attend pride parades in Gotham City, which, I mean, maybe the crime rate wouldn't be so high if Nightwing and Robin were out vigilanteing instead of, going to pride events, but I digress. Also, by the way, Gotham Knights failed, and it reviewed poorly, like it did not sell well at all. And here we can see that Saber Interactive, they also worked on Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2, which you can see on screen now. Apologies if it's in black and white, by the way. YouTube really hates blood, and this game is just gory as hell. And of course, they're also working on the upcoming Jurassic Park Survival. It stars a woman of color who runs around in a game that is based on the movie that was directed by a white guy based on a novel that was also written by a white guy as well. I noticed that a lot, by the way. These woke writers love to speak about how they hate white men so much, yet they can't seem to make anything unique themselves. They just attach themselves to things white guys made and then insert diversity and think it's an own when it's just lazy. Why couldn't you make a Jurassic Park game without the iconic locations from the movie? Why did you have to use audio from the movie to promote this game? Why couldn't you make anything original? I mean, even the trailer uses moments like the kitchen scene with the raptors, but now it's a diverse woman of color there instead. Everything these weirdos touch is just member berries, but they inject diversity, equity, and inclusion instead. It's so boring, lame, and tiring at this point. I wouldn't even be surprised if Space Marine 2 has female Space Marines in it. I wouldn't be shocked at this point. And currently, this Ashley Cooper is writing at Motive Studio because of course they are. It fits the memo to a T. Motive is currently making an Iron Man open world game, so yet again, like I just said, we have another white male character franchise that was made by white men being hijacked by activists because they can't make anything unique of their own. Will the Iron Man game be good? I don't know, but I can bet you that Riri Williams will be in the game and they'll probably pull a Miles Morales like they did in Spider-Man 2, and Iron Man won't even really be the main character in his own game that is literally named after him. I would be honestly shocked if Riri Williams isn't in that Iron Man game. She will either be in it at first, and then if the game is successful, she will absolutely be playable in a sequel. And I bet even then she'll have a major role in the game's plot anyways, because these writers can't pass up injecting their politics more into stuff as they already do. I'll say the same thing for Insomniac's Wolverine as well. X-23 will absolutely be in that game too. And I guarantee you she'll be playable either in the first or second game until, like Miles Morales, she hijacks the franchise and they'll use Wolverine imagery to lure you in to buy it but he'll get sidelined, of course. It's also tiring. I really hope I'm wrong, by the way. I would want nothing more than to have actual competent, great Wolverine or Iron Man games. But the days of giving fans what they want for the money that they spend is long behind us these days, Western-wise anyways. Should also mention that Ashley Cooper was one of the people who was shaming others who played and bought Hogwarts Legacy, which is rich considering they worked on Gotham Knights, which is also Warner Bros. Owned. I guess you can attempt to self-sabotage your own employer's products as long as you disguise it within the fabrics of virtue signaling. It's just pathetic. And this person is involved with Space Marine 2. Games Workshop really is working extra hard this year to ensure they lose as much money as possible. I'm telling you, man, so many of these Western games are infested with activists. You just need to vote with your wallet and refuse to support them. I already know Space Marine 2 will somehow self-sabotage itself, and I truly hope I'm wrong because the game does objectively look fun to play. But if the game ends up being yet another We Hate White People simulator, yeah, consider my wallet closed. One developer thankfully actually went against the wokeness to a degree. There's a game in early access right now that's called No Rest for the Wicked. Also from that Park Place, this one's titled No Rest for the Wicked. CEO Thomas Mahler rebukes consultant Alexander Brazy who attempted to justify DEI hiring practices. He was fired. So this Alexander person works for a consulting agency because of course they do, and they said in less than a month ago stuff like how DEI is about helping people in marginalized groups get exposed to roles, but we know he's lying. It's actually about destroying the foundations that have built great work in the past and then replacing with people who don't have the talent to be there, but instead just hiring them based on sexuality or skin color. Nobody cares if someone is a person of color as long as they're actually competent at their job. But based on so many blunders in the past like Suicide Squad and more, that's clearly not the case. They're just hiring people who raise the ESG score. Let's just call it how it is. Anyway, the CEO for this Wicked game responded to people claiming the game had gone woke because Alexander worked on it, to which he said, "This person is not affiliated with Moon Studios in any way whatsoever anymore. We contracted him for a short stint and he was fired for bringing nothing but friction into our team, just FYI. I bet that one stung for Alexander real bad, and good, because Thomas Mahler here just said it how it is. They brought on some consulting person and they attempted to self-sabotage the entire project in order to fit their own agenda. Thankfully, Moon Studios saw the writing on the wall and threw this person to the curb." Thomas even said more via Twitter. "We don't really hire consultants, so pardon me if I'm ignoring all your messages. I pretty much agree with what Steve Jobs had to say about consulting, and I know I'll get some hate for this, but it is what it is." As for what he's referring to, Thomas is agreeing to what Apple founder Steve Jobs said about consulting, which was, and I quote, "I don't think there's anything inherently evil in consulting. I think that without owning something over an extended period of time, like a few years, where one has the chance to take responsibility for one's recommendations, where one has to see one's recommendations through all action stages and accumulate scar tissue for the mistakes and pick oneself up off the ground and dust oneself off, one learns a fraction of what one can. Coming in and making recommendations and not owning the results, not owning the implementation, I think is a fraction of that of the value and a fraction of the opportunity to learn and get it better. You do get a broad cut of companies, but it's very thin. It's like a picture of a banana. You might get a very accurate picture, but it's only two-dimensional, and without the experience of actually doing it, you never get three-dimensional, so you might have a lot of pictures on your walls. You can show it off to your friends. You can say, look, I've worked in bananas, I've worked in peaches, I've worked in grapes, but you never really taste it. That's what I think," end quote. In case you're having a hard time as to what Steve Jobs is saying here, he's saying that people who consult should never be listened to in a gospel-like manner, because their jobs begin and ends before the final result has taken shape, and a consultant never actually has to deal with the aftermath of whatever decisions they've actually made. But instead they work, then they get paid, and then they screw off, and then the people who paid for the consultation are left to pick up the pieces based on what that consultant did. A good example of what Steve Jobs is referring to here, of course way later on after he passed, is like what Sweet Baby Inc. does. They're only involved with the creation process and then they get paid, but they never have to actually deal with the fallout of their actions. Studios closed, games don't do well either critically or financially, but technically none of that really affects a consulting firm like Sweet Baby, because obviously they already got their money and left. Whether the studio falls or not ends up being something the studio only has to deal with. And I think that's really smart and true of what Steve Jobs is alluding to here. You may think consultants are a great idea, but really they aren't, because they know that they don't have to face the music of their own actions when the time inevitably comes. They just get paid for their oftentimes moronic ideas and practices, and then they move on to the next grifting job while the people before are left in a disaster of that consultant's making. So circling back to No Rest for the Wicked, let's hypothetically say that this Alexander guy who was consulting but got fired, he actually ended up staying, hypothetically. Likely, Moon Studios would be left with a game riddled with DEI and wokeness, and then when the game released, nobody would buy it because it either hates white men, or whatever other racist ideology it pushes, but Alexander wouldn't care either way what happens to Moon Studios. Because he got paid, and his job, which was pushing his message, was effective and got sent out there, so in his mind, he did his job and got what he wanted. And if Moon Studios suffered layoffs and whatnot, in Alexander's woke head, that is a price he was willing to pay in order to advance his agenda. You can see when I explain it to you that ultimately what consultants do most of the time is nothing but self-needing and greedy on their part. They don't care about the sales or review scores. If you told them, hey, if we say we hate white men and push diversity, this game's Metacritic will tank and will lose millions of dollars. In the woke consultant's head, that's a price they're willing to pay to push their activism because of course it's not their money or reputation that will pay the price. And that's disgusting to me, but that's how it is. And if you circle this back to Warhammer, Spider-Man, Suicide Squad, you name it, these companies have to pick up the pieces while the sweet babies and Alexanders just frolic over to the next franchise that they'll ruin in the name of diversity. I really hope No Rest for the Wicked ends up doing well because it looks very fun to play, and I think it's in Moon Studios' best interest to capitalize on that goodwill and ride off into the sunset with all the money and positive fan feedback if they continue down this path. Because you gain nothing from these consulting agencies except contempt, financial loss, and ultimately the entire closure of your studio. Look at the corpses of studios before you that have done that. You're either stupid or a prisoner if you do the same. Finally, let's get an update on Helldivers 2. Currently, the game is reaching very negative reviews on Steam for the whole PlayStation sign-in account controversy, and now the community managers and even the CEO are apologizing. Spitz, the community manager, said via Discord following the whole fiasco, "Nobody should feel bad for me, to be honest. I let the negativity get under my skin and gave a few people an attitude. That's on me. I completely understand why people are upset at the required account linking. I'm not thrilled about it either. And my suggestion to people to change their reviews to negative was completely genuine. There are good and bad ways to express discontent. And coming after the devs and moderators in here isn't the solution and won't get this decision changed. People are emotional, and rightfully so. Many of them won't be able to play the game anymore. It sucks. I'm not trying to attack anyone for being displeased with the change. I'm just trying to protect my team from the backlash, so I jumped on the grenade. I don't think we should be attacking Spitz for this because it's not Arrowhead's decision when it comes to what is happening with Helldivers, it's Sony's. Even the CEO tried to tell people where to sign up but also apologized for everything as well. People then told the CEO of Arrowhead, did you know in places like the UK and Ireland that you need to give photo ID of yourself in order to make a PlayStation account? Which isn't required in North America yet, by the way, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, I didn't have to do it, and the CEO even responded saying he didn't even know that that was a thing. So you can tell this entire Helldivers thing has been a communication nightmare all around, when not even the CEO is aware of how things go down anymore. This is a massive oopsie on Sony's part, and I think that they really need to fix this. But as you can see, from woke Warhammer writers, CEOs getting blindsided by their own higher-up owners, and the real damage hiring activists can do can be felt all over. And also why it's so important to not hire these insane consulting agencies if you ever want your games or whatever else to be successful. The game industry right now is on fire, and that's putting it lightly, and it's nowhere nearing its end. I fully expect things to go subatomic demon core levels of nuclear very soon, but I'll keep you informed as much as I possibly can. Please vote with your wallets and keep your voices heard wherever you are. We can change things for the better, but for now, thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, and like the video, and thanks to my patrons as well. Have a wonderful day, don't lose hope, and I'll see you in the next one.